In the summer, it's routine for Gary to go on business trips. Even when I had a miscarriage, he had to go. I couldn't help but secretly follow him. I discovered that every year, during the month he was on a business trip, he was actually with another woman and a child. What's even more ridiculous is, during those fake business trips, his parents, friends, and colleagues were all helping him cover up. For 5 whole years, I was eagerly looking forward to having our child. I put my heart into building this home. And for what? While waiting for Gary at the airport, I noticed that mother and son. The mom had a delicate, gentle look, her face full of warmth. The little boy, with a timid look in his eyes, clung to her clothes and stared intently at the monkey keychain on my bag. It was a small fabric monkey, a gift from Gary during our honeymoon. It's a bit worn out, but I carry it everywhere. He tentatively pulled it, and the fabric monkey buzzed. The mom gave me an apologetic look and pulled him close, whispering, "That belongs to the lady. Wait till daddy comes, and he'll buy one for you." The little boy stubbornly glared at me, still fixated on the fabric monkey. The mom had no choice but to pat his head and move to the other side. I felt a bitter pang in my heart, unconsciously rubbing my belly. I almost became a mom. Half a month ago, an accidental fall caused my miscarriage. Gary and I have been married for 5 years. We've been eagerly waiting for a baby. Every summer, he goes on a month-long business trip, but I thought this time would be different. I longed for him to stay by my side during this time. But he just looked at me with regret. "Wendy, the ticket was booked a month ago. Can't someone else go for you? I'm in this condition." He hesitated for a long time and then gently shook his head. Saying I wasn't angry would be a lie. I just couldn't understand what job would make him leave his miscarrying wife. So I found a scalper to book an earlier flight. I was anxious, afraid he'd be shocked and angry to see me later. But I just wanted to be near him. I was at my weakest moment. When the flight arrived, the crowd picking up passengers grew. I was squeezed to the edge, trying to protect my still aching belly. Gary is tall, he stood out immediately. I was about to wave, but then a piercing child's voice shattered the air, "Daddy." The little boy shot like an arrow into his arms. Gary's face lit up with a smile, lifting him high. He then naturally held the woman's hand with his free hand. My heart pounded, and the ache in my belly spread through my body. The boy hugged his neck, saying in a childish voice, "Daddy, you haven't kissed mommy yet." When Gary bent down to her, his eyes caught sight of me. He paused slightly, the woman already kissing his lips with a smile. I stared blankly, and a loud voice echoed in my mind. "She's much more practiced than I am." A few minutes later, Gary and I stood face to face outside the airport not far away. The mother and son watched us. My wrist throbbed where he had gripped it, and I finally managed to shake him off. His face changed slightly. "Why did you come here?" I couldn't help but laugh. People really do laugh when they're furious. "Business trip?" "Gary, shouldn't you explain first?" He hesitated, glancing at the 2 people in the distance, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "Before, I donated some little guys. Later she found me." The woman's name was Linda. She owned a flower shop. The little boy glaring at me from her arms was named Leo. Hearing this name made all my blood freeze. "Gary, how dare you?" When we were newlyweds, we wrote down many names on paper. Gary had pointed happily at the 2 I wrote. "Our boy will be Leo, and if it's a girl, she'll be Daisy." He clearly remembered too, his face pale as he avoided my eyes. "Wendy, I didn't think too much." He explained that Linda contacted him after she had the baby. The baby was small and often in and out of the hospital. Linda reached out just to inform me about the child's condition, fearing he wouldn't make it. Later, when the child survived against the odds, Linda wanted me to spend some time with him when possible, so he wouldn't grow up thinking he didn't have a father. A cold sensation crept up inside me. Thinking back, all of this had been hidden from me since we got married. No wonder he went on a business trip every summer. He sighed. "I only spend a month with him, we don't keep in touch otherwise." I reached for his phone, but he pulled back with a startled look. Usually, he left his phone lying around. I could unlock and check it anytime. It wasn't until now that I noticed this one was different, though the same model. It was a different color, with a family photo on the back. Rage shot through me. Without thinking, I slapped him hard. "Daddy!" Leo shouted, tearing away and charging at me. His small head slammed into my belly. It hurt. I had never felt such pain before. I was rushed to the nearest hospital. During the examination, my forehead and back were soaked, clutching my belly in agony. Gary, holding a distressed Leo, couldn't stop the boy from kicking at me. He yelled, "Don't hit my daddy, bad woman." He screamed that all the way. People stared at me with strange looks, and Gary didn't say a word to defend me. Linda took Leo outside, visibly anxious. She returned alone, clearly guessing who I was. But like they had an unspoken agreement, they said nothing in front of others. The doctor advised bed rest and left the room. Gary tried to help me up. I coldly pushed his hand away. His face darkened. He turned to Linda. "Take Leo home first. I need to talk to her." That simple sentence shattered the last bit of hope I had for him. Linda, looking pitifully at me, wouldn't leave. "I understand you can't accept this, but I just want Leo to have a complete childhood." We always agreed to tell him that Dad was just working out of town and could only be with him during the summer break each year. She started to kneel as she spoke. "Please, I'm begging you, don't tell the child anything." There were other patients and their families in the room, and curious eyes moved among us. Someone muttered, "Is the one on the bed the mistress? That's too brazen." Gary heard it but just furrowed his brows, not uttering a word. Looking at Linda's pitiful appearance, it's no wonder the people in the room sided with her. At times like this, I had to count on myself. I straightened my body and pried her fingers off the bed sheet one by one. "We've been married for 5 years. How old is your son this year?" The room was suddenly filled with sharp, prying eyes, all focused on Gary. Linda had already slid to her knees, trembling, afraid to lift her head. I removed the needle from my hand and felt a bit dizzy getting out of bed. It seems people only truly grow up after experiencing utter despair. I never thought I could be so aggressive. "We've been married for 5 years, and you go on a business trip every summer. Even this time, when I just had a miscarriage, you still had to go on a business trip. So you've been hiding such a big son from me all along? Gary, should I say you're a master of time management? And you?" I stared hard at Linda. "Did you pick one from the sperm bank and get pregnant, so why are you here now? You didn't plan anything, right? So what about publicly kissing a married man?" My voice got louder and louder. "Who knows what dirty deeds you've been up to when I'm not around? Wendy, you." I never expected Gary, who had been silent, to sharply stand in front of her to block me. The man who had dated me for 3 years and been married to me for 5, was now protecting someone else in front of me. "Linda didn't want to compete with you. We're only doing this for the child." I couldn't understand how he could shamelessly say that with a straight face. With one hand shielding the woman behind him, he spoke to me with deep emotion. "It's just 1 month a year, the rest of my life is yours. When Leo turns 18, we'll explain everything to him." Linda, behind him, spoke timidly. "It's just 1 month, the child won't bother you once he grows up. It's you, not you too." I heard clearly the small hidden intention in her words. Leo pushed open the door and ran in, diving into Linda's arms. He was holding my fabric monkey, waving it provocatively at me. Gary recognized it and frowned, reaching out to grab it. "That's the lady's, give it back to her, Leo." I had already stood up, coldly watching the boy writhing in her arms. "Don't bother, keep it." Being so young yet having sticky fingers, one parent clearly isn't enough. Gary reached out to pull me, but I pushed him away as if electrocuted. "Don't touch me. When the storm strikes, stay far away. You don't need to sneak around anymore. There's nothing worth fighting over." I walked out from the room to the street, with Gary closely following. I wanted to tell him to get lost, but I had no strength left. Linda chased after us with the child, gasping for breath. Leo cried loudly, as Gary had taken away the fabric monkey. all the noise was making me feel more agitated. Gary kept trying to grab my wrist. "Wendy, let's talk when we get back." I had to stop and look at him. "Besides me catching you, who else knows about this?" He avoided my eyes, looking awkward and nervous, and I already knew the answer. His parents knew, his friends knew. Maybe even his coworkers knew. During his so-called business trips, they helped cover for him. I felt an immense sense of absurdity. So all that talk about company financial issues and canceled vacations was fake? And your salary cut by a third, also fake? He suddenly seemed a bit impatient. "Wendy, I never cut your allowance. Have I ever denied you anything?" Of course, he's so righteous even when a friend jokingly said he didn't love me enough for not handing over his salary card. He could deflect it by saying, "I just don't want Wendy to worry about finances." If he had given it to me earlier, would we be here now? I took a few deep breaths to steady my frayed nerves. "I'll contact a lawyer to draft a divorce agreement soon." He looked at me in disbelief. "Just over this small matter?" "Wendy, this child was before our marriage, and my feelings for you." I held back nausea and interrupted him. "Marital income is our joint property. I will reclaim every penny you transferred out." I said this while looking at Linda. Her expression changed slightly, but she still pretended to calmly smile wryly. "I'm not after money. I haven't touched a single cent of it. I can give it all back." I flew back alone, contacting a lawyer before boarding. Gary wanted to follow me, but Leo wouldn't let him go. The little boy cried till his face turned red, gasping for breath and starting to cough. The two adults were fumbling, patting his back, pinching his philtrum. Amid the chaos, I coldly passed through the security check. Before turning off my phone, I called my former boss to ask if he still needed people. He was stuck in rush hour traffic. Shouting, "What kind of nonsense is that? You're always welcome back." Gratitude welled up inch by inch in my heart, turning into choked up thanks. Over half a year ago, Gary encouraged me to quit to focus on getting pregnant. After the unexpected miscarriage 2 weeks ago, I fell into unprecedented sorrow. The feeling of abandonment and helplessness was overwhelming. Throughout, Gary remained calm. As if the sadness didn't concern him, as if we hadn't lost the awaited new life. The flight landed in the middle of the night. Dragging my exhausted body, I walked out, seeing my best friend and her husband waiting with red eyes. Tina ran over and hugged me tightly without a word. My emotions completely collapsed on the way. I buried my head in her shoulder, crying my heart out. Tina's husband Zach was the lawyer I hired. He was also a longtime friend of Gary and me. At that moment, he could only stand there helplessly, explaining that he really had no idea. I believed him. Gary wouldn't dare let Tina know. Ever since we started dating, Tina looked down on him and tried to break us up countless times. Now she's so angry that she's punching my back with her small fists. "I told you so. You can't outplay someone who's that smooth." Tina and her husband drove me home, and my phone kept ringing on the way. Gary was calling, and so were his parents. Tina angrily turned off the phone and said, "No talking except about the divorce." I had never felt so exhausted. When I had the miscarriage, Gary's parents had red eyes as they comforted me. But now, thinking back, they must have known about Leo all along. I felt like my whole world had turned upside down, and I was the only fool who didn't see it coming. Something flashed in my mind. I suddenly felt cold and clutched Tina's hand tightly. "Come with me to the hospital tomorrow." I had all my checkups at the maternal and child hospital from pregnancy to miscarriage. After coming out of the doctor's office, I was trembling uncontrollably. Tina was so furious that her face turned white, and she used every swear word she knew. The doctor's words kept echoing in my ears. "Your husband brought your medical records to ask me questions. There was also a little boy with him." Tina stared at me, pressing her hands on my shoulders. "I can't understand how he could do something like this behind your back. Leo wasn't just weak after birth, he had thalassemia. No wonder Gary suddenly pushed for us to start trying for a baby. He kept urging me to quit my job and stay home to rest right when a big project was at its peak. When I got home, Gary was already there. He looked like he hadn't slept all night, with dark circles under his eyes and his shirt all wrinkled. "Wendy, I'm back. I'll spend this month with you." I calmly changed my shoes and took out the prepared divorce papers, placing them in front of him. He ignored them, just flipping through his phone. "Didn't you say you wanted to go to the beach? I'll book the tickets and take you once I've rested." He handed me a bag he had by his side. "I got you that bag you wanted. I wanted to surprise you on our anniversary." I put a black pen in front of him. He stopped talking and quickly looked up at me. "Your anger should have a limit, right? Didn't I explain enough? The child was conceived before we got married. I just donated twice, and I didn't even know who she was before Leo was born." He rubbed his temples wearily. "If you don't like it, I won't see her again." I burst out laughing. I couldn't stop, laughing until tears came out. "Gary, when I was pregnant, were you hoping for my umbilical cord blood to save Leo?" His face went pale instantly, staring at me. "Wendy, you? How did I find out?" I asked the doctor. "She said you impatiently asked several times during my pregnancy. If Leo's condition hadn't stabilized, would you have been devastated by my miscarriage?" I slowly took off my wedding ring and threw it on the table. It rolled to the floor. I was looking forward to our baby with all my heart. "Gary, you're not fit to be a father. If you have any humanity left, sign the papers quickly. Living under the same roof with you makes me sick." Gary contacted Zach to amend the divorce agreement. He willingly gave up all marital property, including the house and car, to me. The agreement Zach brought back already had Gary's signature. He regrets it. He thought he complicated something simple. I didn't know how their conversation went, but Zach said Gary cried. He really wants to win you back. He says he doesn't care about the property. Tina spat and glared at him. "Stop passing messages, all right? It's disgusting." Zach scratched his head sheepishly. "I'm just the messenger. No sides here." Gary moved out the day after signing the papers. He sent me multiple messages before leaving. Originally, he tried calling, but I hung up. "I know you don't want to see me right now. I'll stay at a hotel near the company. You should move back home and take care of yourself. Otherwise, I won't be able to rest easy." I didn't do it on purpose. She mentioned cord blood, and I just asked the doctor casually. "Wendy, like you, I've always looked forward to our child. That has never changed." I deleted the messages one by one. Keeping them on my phone felt like an insult. The news of my divorce from Gary spread quickly. His parents were the first to show up at my parents' house with large bags of gifts. I heard they were very apologetic, but my parents chased them out with a broom. My dad was still furious when he called me. "They're so old yet so clueless. If they wanted to persuade anyone, it should be you at your place. How could they come to us first?" My parents had always liked Gary, said he was decent looking and had a good job. But they supported me wholeheartedly on the divorce. Especially after hearing about the cord blood, my dad went from calling him a wonderful son-in-law to a jerk. To my surprise, Linda came to see me. Her child, just like in the airport, bumped into me, asking angrily, "Where's my dad? Where did you hide him?" He threw the ragged cloth monkey on the ground in front of me and stomped on it fiercely. "Take it back. Who wants your broken stuff?" He then started banging on the door with all his strength. "Daddy, come out. It's Leo." I looked at Linda with a bewildered expression. Her face was full of embarrassment, but the hatred in her eyes was impossible to hide. She pulled Leo closer and whispered, "The child wants to see his dad. I really can't help it. Right now, he doesn't even dare to answer my calls." I smiled and took out my phone. "Want me to call him for you?" She immediately looked at me with hopeful eyes. "It'd be great if he could come. I don't have any other requirements. I just hope he can have a good talk with Leo." My smile didn't even reach my eyes, which went cold again. Why should I? I have no obligation to get involved in your matters. The fear and color slowly drained from her face. Unconsciously, she stood straighter. Wendy, do you have to be so petty with a child? Her gaze swept over my belly with malice. You almost became a mother too. Don't you understand a mother would do anything for her child? I laughed at her. Including using him as a bargaining chip to repeatedly destroy someone else's family? Linda, I'm curious, what was your motive for having his child back then? Before giving birth, you didn't even know who the father was, right? I stepped closer and watched her tense and uneasy expression. Donors don't have their info available. So how did you find Gary? I'm not trying to protect Gary's privacy, just curious. She blushed and covered Leo's ears, mumbling. I just wanted my kid to be healthy. I never meant to hurt you. I remembered the familiar kiss at the airport. I couldn't help but squat and smooth out the wrinkles on Leo's clothes. Answer Andy's question, and I'll tell you where your dad is. Leo brushed off his mom's hand and asked me in a muffled voice, really? I nodded. Tell Auntie, where does Dad sleep when he visits you? Linda tried to cover his mouth but was too late. Of course, with my mom. I looked at the defiant Leo and pressed the speaker button with a smile. Gary's eager voice burst out. Wendy, let me explain. It's not what you think. Leo got excited hearing his voice, jumped up, and tried to grab my phone. Dad, it's Leo. Dad, where are you? He couldn't reach, so he kicked and punched me. This time, I didn't indulge him. I grabbed his collar and pulled him back. What are you doing? Linda anxiously caught him and glared at me angrily. I snickered and spoke into the phone slowly. Please come and take your son away from my doorstep. And if this woman bothers me again, Gary, I won't mind letting more people know about your kid. I hung up and opened the door. Leo was still screaming and crying behind me. As the door slammed shut, they were both left outside. Gary didn't come to get them, his parents did. They knocked properly for a while, but I was busy cooking noodles for myself in the kitchen. I ignored them, turning the TV volume to the max. After a while, the commotion outside stopped. I explained the whole situation to Tina and her husband while eating, treating it like gossip. Tina sneered, what a coward, sending his parents to deal with it. After cleaning up the kitchen, I replied to my former boss's message. Confirmed my start date and went to the closet to pick an outfit. Opening the wardrobe, seeing Gary's clothes lined up, I paused. He left in a hurry, only took a few changes. Maybe he thought there was a chance we wouldn't divorce. I felt a twinge and took a photo, then sent it to him. I won't be home tomorrow. Come get your stuff, or I'll throw it out. He was continuously typing in the chat box. But no message came through, even after I took a bath and got into bed. Instead, there was a friend request. If you were really happy, he wouldn't come back to us every year. I didn't accept it, took a screenshot, and posted it on Twitter. I remembered what Tina once said. Some men lose their integrity from the moment they break up. Just from that post, friends I hadn't talked to in years were questioning Gary in the comments. Of all the relationships to fail, didn't expect yours. He chased Wendy so hard, only to disappoint her like this? He seemed to have stayed up all night, sending countless messages. The top one was just a few words. I never meant to hurt you. It was like someone stabbing multiple times, then pitifully saying they didn't know it would hurt, bleed, or even kill. I adjusted my mood, put on a new outfit, and headed to work. On the way, lots of thoughts ran through my mind. From day one of our relationship, I tied my life to Gary's. Only now could I step back and reevaluate myself. No longer seeing myself just as someone's wife. I could face everything that happened between us more clearly. Saw his indecisiveness from the start. Realized he never saw it as hurtful. Trust collapsed, love faded faster than we thought. Returning from work, it didn't look like Gary had been back. I rolled up my sleeves and packed his things into bags. Tossed them out the door, took a photo, and sent it to him. Also informed him to finalize the divorce after the cooling-off period. Then I deleted him without hesitation. Not just blocked, completely erased. All those memories of our love vanished. On my second day at the new job, the front desk called about flowers from May, a blood-red bouquet of roses and irises, no card. I glanced and tossed it in the trash. Every day, the same flowers arrived. On the 10th day, I called the flower shop's number I found. The voice on the other end was Linda's, soft and gentle. Hello. I controlled my emotions and spoke slowly. The cooling-off period ends in 2 days. Can't you wait? She stuttered like a scared rabbit. You really misunderstood me. I just wanted to help him. I laughed in disbelief. You two are really something, always saying you'll help each other. Before being stupid, ask Gary if he ever sent me flowers. I'm allergic to pollen, and Gary was well aware of it when he pursued me. Linda was silent for a moment. Leo is sick, and the child really needs him now. He's staying at the hospital constantly. Wendy, the child is innocent. I didn't listen any further and hung up straight away. For another child, I might have thought of the one that stayed in my belly for a brief period, but Leo can't stir up my sympathy and pity. Innocent, I'm innocent, too. The cooling-off period ended, and Gary was late. Sweat was slightly beading on his forehead when he walked up the steps, wanting to speak but hesitated. I glanced at him once and then walked inside. He sighed and followed. Wendy, this is for you. He fished out a stuffed monkey from his pocket, the tag still on it. Just like the one I used to have. On our honeymoon, we went to a somewhat obscure small town. The stuffed monkey was handmade, not mass-produced. He muttered, I made a special trip. Luckily, the person was still there. He kept holding out his hand, his eyes filled with hope as he looked at me. I pursed my lips, let's go. I only took a 2-hour leave. I didn't take it, even though it looked very similar to the old one. At the signing part, Gary held down my hand. Maybe it was my icy glare that pricked him because he hung his head low. Wendy, can we think about this again? You know I love you. I withdrew my hand and quickly signed my name. As I threw the pen back to him, I couldn't help but laugh. Gary, if in the past 5 summers, you'd cared about my feelings even once, we wouldn't have ended up here. He had so many chances to come clean. So many moments to turn back. He fell silent, his hand trembling as he held the pen. Tears dropped onto the paper. He hastily looked away, raising his hand to cover his face. His usually neat handwriting was all crooked that day. As I left, he called out to me sorrowfully from behind. Wendy, will you ever forgive me? I stopped and looked back at the bit of hope that emerged in his eyes. If karma exists, I hope every bit of it strikes you. I'm not that magnanimous. I love deeply, I hate deeply. Unlucky in love, maybe lucky at work. The boss was soon quite pleased with his wise decision. After a promotion and a raise during the low season, he gave me a long vacation. Tina and I quickly booked tickets for an impromptu trip. We basked on the beach, and at night we relaxed, drinking. Close to return, it started to drizzle. The beach had only a few people, with a sense of ease and relaxation everywhere. A child's piercing cry was strangely out of place. Tina and I followed the sound, both slightly stunned. Leo was lying on the sand, throwing a tantrum, sending sand flying everywhere. Shouting, I don't want to go, I want to dig sand. Linda stood in front, at a loss. Next to them, bearing a look of suppressed anger, was the ex-husband I hadn't seen in months. Maybe it was too loud. Gary looked around, slightly awkward. The moment he caught my gaze, he froze. Then, he walked towards me. Beyond him, I saw Linda's face turn dark in an instant. Gary looked at me awkwardly. You moved, didn't you? I went looking for you a few times. I thought this wasn't a good time for small talk, so I kept a cold face and ignored him. He looked down, awkwardly rubbing his wedding ring on his left hand. It was still our wedding ring. Quite deliberate. Tina snorted, teasing him. Gary, got time, huh? Not working, out playing with kids. Gary glanced at me, his face blushing more. I quit my job. I didn't expose him. Zach mentioned he's been struggling lately, losing several projects. The company reassigned, then demoted him. He left out of pride. Linda came over with the child, clinging to his arm. There was a bit of provocation in her eyes, but a thin false smile on her lips. What a coincidence, bumping into each other here. Gary's face darkened, stepping aside to keep a distance from her. Her false smile immediately collapsed, her eyes filled with more hatred towards me. Leo yelled for Gary to carry him, but he pretended not to hear. The kid angrily waved at me, "Bad woman." I smiled at him, saying word by word, "Say it again." Bad woman rips little brat's mouths. He wanted to speak, but Linda covered his mouth. Gary looked utterly exhausted. "You guys go back first." There was such coldness in his voice that Linda's face changed, but she only gritted her teeth and turned away. Gary kept staring at me, like he gathered immense courage. "Wendy, can we talk?" I stood still. Anything can be said here. Tina also posed to listen, but her eyes were full of mockery. Gary sighed. "Leo had a few episodes. She's been pushing to have another child." I laughed. "Congratulations, you love being instant dad, don't you?" His face flushed, then paled. "Wendy, you know I don't love her. I don't want to force myself for a child." He looked at me eagerly. "Even if I made mistakes, don't I deserve happiness?" I held back harsh words, nodding dismissively. "You still have a lot to learn about picking yourself up and irreversible failures." The light in his eyes dimmed, and he fumbled. "I miss the old us." Everything was moving forward as we wished. Tina interrupted. "You might want to check on your son, he seems to be fighting." 2 kids were wrestling on the beach. Linda screamed, "Don't touch my son, he's sick." But it was Leo riding on another kid, pulling and biting. Just because he wanted the toy that the kid had, he shoved him down. Gary awkwardly separated the kids, apologizing repeatedly. But fierce parents ganged up, grabbing his collar and fighting him. Tina and I turned and walked away. The rain got heavier, and the sounds of shouting and screaming grew behind us. More and more people were heading the opposite way, rushing towards the beach. Soaked from the rain, I took a shower first thing when we got back to the hotel. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating on the bed. Next to me, Tina was on a video call with Zach, looking all lovey-dovey. I don't even remember when I fell asleep. Just that there was thunder and lightning flashing brightly in the middle of the night. When I woke up in the morning to check out, I saw people whispering in the lobby. "Did you hear? A man and a woman died on the beach yesterday." Sounded like a fight. Someone took out a knife. The man died a horrible death. Help had arrived, but he got struck by lightning several times. The woman seemed to start it. Someone saw her go back for the knife. And there's a kid in the hospital, nobody knows if they'll make it. I glanced toward the beach from a distance. Lots of people gathered, couldn't see what was happening. My phone had a bunch of missed calls. The number looked familiar. I didn't think much of it, checked out of the hotel, and headed to the airport with Tina. Passing by the beach, something shiny caught my eye. I couldn't help but stop and look down. It was Gary's wedding ring, lying all alone in the sand. Tina answered her phone, her face turned pale as she looked at me. Zach said, "It's Gary." I gazed at the calm sea. No one could tell how wild it was last night. The pain seemed to fade with the ebbing waves. I stepped on that ring and kept walking. Time to go home, or we'd miss our flight. Turns out, what goes around really does come around.